All right, what is happening? Welcome to THP, the helicopter podcast. I'm trying to do a thing on the THP, so I'm just going to keep saying it. I'd like to hear your feedback, though. If you guys like THP, I just feel like it would look cool on a hat or something like that. But regardless, welcome to the helicopter podcast. I'm your guy, Halsey Schider. Big shout out to Vertical Helicast and our friends at MHM for creating the Vertical Helicast platform, in which we are possible for them. And in fact, MHM, Mike Reno of MHM, was the introduction to today's guest, Darcy Hoover. Darcy, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Oh, very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you. Anytime I hear from Mike at MHM, it was specifically with the introduction of a guest. I always know it's going to be a good guest, and certainly after reading your bio and getting to kind of learn about you and chat with you a little bit before, it certainly seems that Mike did not do me wrong on this one. So just grateful and excited to have you on the show, all the way from Nova Scotia. I don't think I've podcasted with anyone before Nova Scotia.
There's a lot of us out here. A lot of us international guys live in this area.
Yeah, it sounds so extreme. You know, I don't know why. I've always just like when I hear Nova Scotia, I think of like this tundra of snow and ice. It sounds like I'm maybe not so far off today. It sounds like you're getting some snow.
Yeah, we had a big storm. It's not that cold, actually. It's one of the warmest places in Canada just because it's the Gulf Stream comes by and keeps it pretty moderate. So it's one of the warmer places in Canada. A lot of times, everywhere else will get snow and we'll get rain, but we do get some pretty good walls.
Interesting. Well, I hope you're keeping warm. And again, thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. I'm really excited about this. You've had a very long career. Started in 1985. I'm not going to tell you what year I was born, but I can tell you this, that you have been flying helicopters 3 years longer than I've been alive. So I think that makes you plenty qualified to come and chat. In fact, I was trying to kind of rack through my brain of people that I've had on the show and the length of their career. And I think you might have one of the longer careers within the industry that I've had the privilege to talk to. So I think that's really fun. I'm really excited. I think I have some fun stuff planned. So 1985, that's when you start your flight training. But something that struck out to me is this idea that by the time you were 13 years old, you had already essentially read like an entire book on helicopter aerodynamics. You would go to this local garage and you saw a picture of the guy's son there in the Bell 47. It seems like the helicopter bug stung you pretty early. Is that safe to say?
Oh, definitely. I've always been obsessed with them. They had helicopter pad rides too at local fairs where I grew up, and I got to know the guys. Niagara Heli-Air used to come around and do pad rides. It was pretty funny. I actually wrote them. I was still quite young about a job, and they invited me out, taking me around the Niagara Falls and the 47s. Really? They drove, gave me a freebie, flew me around.
Yeah, that's super good. Cool. One of the coolest flights that I ever did was a couple of years ago. I owned an H-130 T2 for a very short period of time. It was, my business is in selling aircraft. Sometimes we'll pick something up, own it for a short time, and resell it. And so while I was the proud owner of this aircraft, I was up in Toronto, and what do? You get in and you fly out to Niagara Falls. It was absolutely incredible. Such a beautiful area to fly over. And I think probably one of the most epic ways to soak it in is via helicopter.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think I had a lot of encouragement back then. Well, because of those guys, for sure. And also, I had a friend his dad had his fixed wing. I used to go flying with him occasionally, and we used to go to all the air shows. We were at the Hamilton Air Show, and there was a sea stallion. I can't remember how old I was. It must have been, I don't know, maybe 14. And I was sitting in the aircraft. The pilot was put on the helmets, the Gentex, and yeah, there was the Chinese hat, like at the top of the cyclic, and I didn't know what it was. I had read all these books, so I wrote a letter to the U.S. Navy asking them what the button was on top of the cyclic, explain the whole story, and I got a reply from Colonel A.J. Kettering, who was involved in research and engineering at the Pentagon, and we became pen pals and wrote back and forth. And he invited us down to the Pentagon, so my folks took us down, and I got a tour of the Pentagon. Went out and saw some. It was the ABC, the Advanced Blade concept was being tested at the time, and we went to the Aviation Museum there in Washington. So I had a lot of encouragement when I was younger to kind of reinforce my desire to fly.
Yeah, that's wild actually that you would at that age not only have the curiosity but the wherewithal to put pen to paper and actually write the U.S. Navy. I think that says a lot about you as kind of
Well,
as your character. That's pretty neat.
I found a lot of that stuff. Yeah, well, a lot of that information you couldn't get at the local library. I grew up pretty rural, and I discovered pretty early on you write a letter to Bell Helicopter or Sikorsky or any of them, tell them you're a kid, you're doing a school project, and they would send you all kinds of stuff. So I used to get all kinds of free, books and posters, and so I started writing a lot of letters. There was no internet back then, obviously, and there wasn't much on TV, so yeah, I used to read a lot, and the local library had a very small selection of books on helicopters, so yeah, it got me started pretty young.
That's awesome. Hey, early on in the episode, we're just going to hear from our sponsors real fast.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
All right, thank you to our sponsors for making the helicopter podcast possible. Yeah, I think that's it is neat. I think that's there's good and bad of all the technology that we have today, and our kids have, and young people have. Back in the day, you made a comment about not as good, not as much TV and whatnot. Go read books, learn things. I think that we kind of lost that a little bit, right? However, some of the cool things, and I've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast, is this idea that now young people can listen to my podcast, or they can go on YouTube and watch videos, or they can go on Instagram and consume content that's kind of helicopter specific. So I think that there's some goods and bads to that, but I think it's really neat that you kind of took that initiative and wrote the Pentagon. I don't think many 14-year-olds have a pen pal at the Pentagon. I don't even know if I don't think I've ever even had a pen pal. So let alone one at the Pentagon, I think is pretty cool. So one of the things that we've talked about in the podcast is this idea of like first generation pilot, second generation. Was this helicopter thing just completely random to you, or was there someone in your family that had been in aviation, had been a helicopter pilot?
No, not at all. I was just something I wanted to do. My dad was driving a long distance truck at the time. My mother was a nurse, so no, there was no aviation in the family at all. Just my good buddy Dan. Like I said, his dad had a fixed wing, and I got to fly with him a little bit, and that's about it.
So you're tried and true first gen pilot, just like myself. We've talked about that on the podcast before because I think that adds some complexity of how do you do training and how do you do this and how do you do that. And a lot of that conversation that I've had has been mirrored around guys and gals like myself that have had training in, say, like the last 10 to 15 years. In
Hmm.
1985, how did you go about kind of figuring out, hey, I love helicopters. I'm passionate about helicopters. This is what I want to do. How did you kind of put all that together, figure out where you're going to go to school?
Well, there wasn't much around. There was one of the few schools in the area that was pretty close, Glanford Aviation in Mount Hope, and it was like a 20-minute country drive. Used to go visit with the boys and just get them up what I needed to do the pilot's license. And at the time, it was 18,000. That included like 20 hours on the 206, and I did everything about with the ground school. I don't think I was 3 months, 4 months,
Wow. And
and
being Canadian, of course, I'm guessing, especially at that time, I know things have changed a little bit, but you essentially did your private, your commercial, and then you're in the working world.
no, I was straight commercial. 100 hours, skip the fixed wing, just 100 hours helicopter.
Oh wow, that's cool. So you can do that. I wasn't aware that you could just go right to commercial. Is that still a thing?
I would, yeah. If you still can, I think you can. I think a lot of people you get into it that want to do a commercial. I think you can go straight to commercial. It's 100
So
hours as opposed to, I don't know. It's probably a little change now, but
very cool. And you said $18,000 to do all
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's amazing.
You're just buying the time on the helicopter.
I paid significantly more in the 2008 2009 timeframe for my
I'm
training, but
sure, I'm
of,
sure.
of course, with how everything works, that was probably still a fair amount of money back in the day. What
Oh
platform,
yeah.
other than the 20 hours and the 206, did you train in?
I was all about 47, G2, Woodblaze. I got a little bit of 500 time as well, and she's 500.
Man, the Bell 47, that has to be a pretty cool aircraft.
It is. Actually, my first job was flying Bell 47. So the first job I picked up was 3B2, I think it was, a turbocharged version with metal blades up out of the North Bay area. I think one of my first jobs, like a moose survey, I had to do some ferrying. This company hired me. I was still quite young. I was doing drywall and washing the boss's truck and babysitting his kids. He had the odd ferry trip to do, and then I got some exploration jobs and surveys. Like moose surveys is the big one. I did spent a whole winter doing that. I had about 300-400 hours flying 47s in the bush before I started gravitating into jet rangers. So,
That's awesome. And it sounds like within kind of your first 2 years of commercial flying, you were able to get a significant amount of flight time, around 1,000 hours.
yeah, I had over 1,000 before I broke 20. So I had a lot of hours very young. There was a company had a contract down the coast in Sept-Îles, Quebec, flying the railway. There's a QCM, Quebec Country Mining Railway, and they had two jet rangers flying 700-800 hours a year up and down the railway. And it was really good flying because there was a camp every 30, 40 miles. They didn't want you flying far away from the track. You had to fly up and down the track. And there's fuel everywhere. So it's pretty uh, controlled environment. It was a good place to get my hours. I flew quite a bit there, for quite a few years
Something
actually.
something nowadays, obviously the industry, as we've moved through the years, has arguably become a safer industry, training wise,
Oh
mentorship
yeah.
wise. Back in 1985, after you get your commercial, you're a low time guy. What was it like going into a company at that time? What kind of emphasis were they putting on, safety and making good decisions, and providing you kind of that mentorship? Was that kind of that safety culture instilled in those early years, or is that something that you've
And
seen kind of evolve throughout the years?
definitely evolved. Basically, it was go get the job done. It was not you had you stay within your limits as far as gross weight and don't crash. Basically, was what the rules were. It was just go out and get the job done. And I scared myself plenty back then. My goodness, I had a couple close calls.
Yeah, it
Yeah, if you
seems
screwed
like
up,
that.
you got trouble for it. But
Yeah, I mean, it seems like back then, it truly was a little bit more of like the Wild West, right, of helicopter aviation.
yeah,
I think even in the
definitely.
80s, airline aviation was still kind of developing into kind of this professional style of flying, and whereas the helicopters, we've always been kind of further behind. So it's always fascinated me to think of like, flying back in that time where it's, nowadays you go to a company, for instance, I went to Maverick Helicopters in the Grand Canyon. Fairly straightforward job, right? You're flying circles around a big hole in the ground and giving tours. That training took a month. We did literally 30 days of ground training, you know, 10, 15
Mhm.
hours of flight training, doing your 135 check ride. I mean, it's a big thing. And I think that's good. I think that's a good,
Yeah.
maybe I think it's okay to be like a little bit overkill.
Yeah.
Whereas, guys like you in the past, like you said, you were probably learning a lot of things as you go. And like you said,
Oh, yeah.
scaring yourself. Is there a specific moment or some moments within that time that you're willing to talk about of like, oh crap, that was kind of scary?
Well, there's a few. I remember going into a little hole. It was my first job ever with a 47, and I came in the spot. I thought I fit fine, and I know the guy was flying with a very experienced geologist. He stuck his head out the door, and he stuck his head back in, and his eyes are, you know, quite big. And I shut it down, and I got out, and the tail rotor was extremely close to a pretty big rock. And I was, he kind of gave me a dirty look, but I think they got me quite cheap. That was the whole idea of having a $100 land. This job was, they're getting the helicopter really cheap because it was a low-time pilot. But yeah, it's kind of scared me. Um, there's a few of
It's
those.
it's those moments. I think we've all, even in the newer world of flying, I think we all have those moments where we say, "Oh man, I dodged a bit of a bullet there," or you make a mistake. I actually had an incident one time in a 44, and I had kind of more experience by that point, at least over 1,000 hours, and I was in Texas and I was doing kind of my own thing and operating a small tour business, and this guy had hired us for a private party and landing at his house. And hey, come land, and I'm going to pay you X amount an hour, and just take my guests flying, for a little lap around the ranch. And you're doing the tour all night, everything's fine. And one of the times I just came a little closer than usual because there was a tree kind of near the landing zone. Sure enough, I clipped the stupid tree with the rotor blade. And it's a small, it was a branch, not like a big tree, but
Mhm.
it actually ended up causing damage, to the rotor blade. And, it's like a moment of like, God damn, like, how did I let that happen? And it does,
Oh, yeah.
sometimes you kind of need those moments to not make those same mistakes.
Yeah, no, I've had a few. Came back with a blade tips green. Engineers have to do an inspection. I remember mostly pushing the weather, though. I scared myself quite a bit trying to get over a mountain pass. And like I'm in a 206, and I remember opening the side window, looking at a treetop out through the, just hover beside this treetop because I couldn't get through this pass. Like, shit, I screwed up, and someplace I shouldn't be. And, I got out of it, but I've had a few good scares that I'm
I think
hoping the
weather,
younger generations, yeah.
yeah, I think weather is a huge factor even nowadays. And I can't imagine, I mean, the equipment that you were flying with in the Bell 47 and in the 206 at that time, I mean, did you even have a GPS or anything like that?
There was no GPS at all. Up until I was flying, I think the first time I saw GPS was flying 76 EMS. It was all a map on your leg, and this was 30 minutes on a in a 206. So you would just take a heading and just what I had the old. We didn't even have the gyro compasses. Like we just had the old floating standby compass. You kind of have to do the opposite of what you need to do, and you just take a heading off of. You had your little compass there, and you stick it down and say, yeah, 12 degrees, and you go off at 12 degrees, and you check your wash, and you see the leg, you hit it a little bit to the left, adjust a bit to the right. This was half an hour. You're just going to go along and see where you're supposed to be.
That's
Yeah,
so cool.
it was yeah, in the mountains it was a little tricky. Sometimes in the hills, but that's the way you had to get it done. I got turned around a few times, not lost, but just not sure if I was in the right valley or.
During my training, obviously, to get your certificates, at least here in the States, even nowadays, they still require that you pull out your flight plotter, you get your E6B out, and
Yeah.
do the full flight plan, do your dead reckoning and your pilotage when you're flying the aircraft. And I have to say, like, really, those are like the only times that I've actually ever used those skills is because it was just part of getting the license. But other than that, I kind of came into flying in the air where at minimum we had GPS, but it wasn't too long until I had my own iPad right in front of me, with a ForeFlight and showing traffic and giving me a nice purple line to follow. It made flying very easily. Obviously, you fly very advanced aircraft nowadays. Do you still find that your early foundation of kind of that old school mentality has helped you in this new environment? Is there still things that you kind of fall
Well, yeah,
back on sometimes?
yeah, definitely. Like I remember the little dial, I can't remember what they call it, on the E6B. You had a little pencil. You'd make a mark for the wind, and then you turn it and
Yep.
see what your
Wind correction.
correction was. And after a while, you just kind of learn that if you got a 15 knot crosswind, you take a 7 degree, depending what your heading is. You just kind of, it feels natural after a while. And then flying an ILS, like when I was flying the 61s out of Halifax, there was a lot of IFR, and there's no autopilot. It's all hand flow. So you're hand flying ILSs all day long. And it really helps because you just, you know what your crosswind is. You just kind of know what your target should be for your crosswind component. It'll adjust. But I think it all just kind of becomes inherent after doing it for so long.
Yeah, that's super cool. I think it's something that I'm grateful for the avionics and the tools that we have nowadays. But
Me too.
certainly, like that type of flying that you learned is a breed of pilot that doesn't really exist anymore if you've trained in like the last 10, 20 years. So much has changed in the advancements, and I love the tools that we have, but I do think that
Me too.
the roots of those, the roots of that, aviation, back when you were learning how to fly and in your first commercial jobs. I mean, that's really flying to me, right? I mean, that's like you were doing so much more than, hey, we had to do. I look at I think you flew EMS. Was it for 6 years there in the beginning?
Almost 9 years. Yeah, we didn't have
Almost
GPS
9 years.
back then. But there's times we couldn't find the guy. Like where we're supposed to pick the guy up. We're on back and forth on the radio, what road to head up, and sometimes you'd land and have to ask somebody, we're looking for this spot, and it wasn't always easy to find the guy you're picking up. We had a lot of scene calls, right? So
And I've always wondered about that because,
tricky.
I flew air medical for a couple of years. I was in mainly a 407 with a updated glass cockpit. And essentially, the SYNCOM would give you a dispatch if it was a scene call, and they would provide you coordinates, and you go to your touchscreen 650, type in the coordinates, boom, you got your nav line, you put the autopilot on, the helicopter flies you right there. So I've always wondered, like, back in the early days of air medical, I mean, I guess you just said it. There was times where you honestly just couldn't find the person.
Yeah, you always did eventually. Like you didn't give up, but yeah, it would always get. It was always tricky. I've had a few, but I kind of wish I would have had that. Like I remember coming back to it was the Madeleine, the small islands, and not too sure. I had a faulty fuel gauge, and I wasn't too sure what my fuel actually was. I was going off my watch because the fuel gauge was pretty erratic, and for the direction I was coming in, if I was 10 degrees off either side, I would have missed the island I was going to. Like, we're like 90, 100 miles offshore in the 206, and the weather was bad. And that was a little nerve wracking. Like, you got a GPS, you know exactly when you're going to land. You can do the fuel count. Like, it just makes life so much easier. And like the ferry trips I've done recently, I can't imagine doing them without a iPad with ForeFlight and all the subscriptions, and it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's very nice. It's great tools. And I think guys like yourself that are really veterans and titans of this industry. I mean, you've been flying helicopters for, I guess you've been flying helicopters longer than you haven't been flying helicopters, in your life. And so,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And I think that it's nice for us young guys that have trained in this last 10, 20 years to have these tools. But I do think that we've lost a little bit, right? And we've lost a little bit of that mystique of aviation and aviating, being an aviator. It's certainly easier nowadays. Air medical today is very safe. I even remember growing up when I was, call it almost 20 years ago when I was finishing up high school. Even in that time, air medical was actually more of a dangerous job. There was a lot of accidents. A lot of the big
Yeah, I
companies here
remember.
in the United States had consistent accidents, and it killed a lot of people. And since that time, air medical has really kind of tightened down the hatch and become a safer industry. What was air medical like? What was your schedule like? Did you have
Well,
minimums? What kind of training? What did that all look like when you were flying medical missions in the early '90s?
well, it was quite a bit different. We even saw back then the accident rates coming from the states, because you guys are doing, scene calls at night, a lot of single pilot at night. That was unheard of. Everything was IFR, two crew, we were started off on 222s and IFR aircraft, and at night you were IFR 76. And they really frowned upon scene calls, and definitely not at night, which was, I thought we were trying to push. We could do night calls. For example, up in Northern Ontario, we have those ice roads, and the ambulances can't go on the ice road. So if there's an accident somewhere, and that's the only way to get there, on a full moon, it's like flying, during the day. But they just wouldn't let us do any scene calls at night at all. It's very safety oriented. Now with NVGs, you could definitely do it safely, but there's still a lot of operators that don't even want you doing scene calls at night in Canada.
Yeah,
I
we,
think
we do a
some
lot
do,
of
but
we do a lot of work with some Canadian friends, and they're boggled, by the
mhm,
stories I'll tell them about what we're doing in the United States. Single engine. I
mhm,
mean, all of my air medical time was single engine. Every other week was nights, and it didn't matter if it was a scene call or an inter-facility transfer. If the weather was good, you're going.
mhm,
And again, you're
mhm.
right. We have MBGs, and the tool is capable, but ultimately, I made the decision of like, man, flying a single engine helicopter in the middle of very, very dark Texas, landing in unapproved areas where you really can't see anything. I mean, MVGs are great to a
Mhm.
point, right? But there's still power lines and other guide
Yeah.
wires for towers and things that you just can't see. I made the personal decision that it wasn't worth it for me. Like,
Mhm.
this is just not what I'm comfortable doing. And,
Mhm.
it's my understanding in Canada, it's two pilots, it's twin engine helicopters. They're not doing the night scenes. I mean, even to this day, the industry is very different between the United States and Canada.
Yeah, I know for sure. It's always, as long as I've been in EMS in Canada, it's been twin engine IFR to crew, so it's definitely very safely done. I
Yeah.
even then we used to have these cone sites, like reflective cones, and some of those being in some remote spot. And you're just trying to find it with your landing light. And this is pre-GPS too. It's just kind of this thing floating in space and trying to do an approach into it. And you had no ambient lighting whatsoever, no horizon. It was tricky stuff. Like, it was one of the hardest things I think I've done, is going into some of those cone sites. It was quasi IFR, VFR. Your co-pilot's calling your rates of descents and closure rates, and you're just trying to keep that ratio, the width to the height of that oval, and hopefully you don't flare. And then if the landing leg goes up, you lose the cones.
That's funny. Did you start
Yeah.
off as an SIC in air medical, or did they put you directly into a PIC position?
Uh yeah, not very long. Like when I went into EMS, I already had over 3,000 hours. And at the time, the airline transport rating, it wasn't, they just started writing the exams. So the two other captains that were at the base that I went to didn't have it. And I went and, studied. And once I got 50 hours at night, I went and wrote the exam and got my ATPL. So I was the only pilot on the base with the ATPL, but I was a co-pilot. I went into captaincy really fast. I don't think I was a year. One of the guys left and just bumped me up. And it wasn't so much hours; it was just meeting the seat, right? So,
Yeah, it's interesting. How much of your flying that you're doing now is a two pilot crew?
I'd say almost all of it. Like, I've been on heavies and big aircraft for most of the last 20 plus years. It was cool. I was doing some interesting work with one company, and they had nothing going on with the 61s. I said, "You guys got anything?" I just want to go flying, and they go, "Well, we want to take an A star up to the Arctic." And I was, geez, I haven't flown single pilot, I haven't flown a single engine in forever. I said, sure. So I went down. I did the A star, the Air Star course, and end up flying it up to the top of Baffin Island. I was up there on a with a fisheries contract, flying around an A-Star for a few months. And I actually loved it. It was a blast. But I hadn't done that in a long time, and I haven't really done it since. But it was good to kind of go back to the roots.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Most of my flying, if not all of it, has actually been single pilot. I don't really have a ton of experience or any experience of being an SIC or a PIC with an SIC in a dual pilot environment. For our listeners out there that might be maybe getting into a job where now they're transitioning from single pilot to dual pilot, what is some of the advice that you would give after all these years of experience of flying two pilot crew of how to be an effective crew member on a helicopter?
Well, I definitely see a difference between guys. Get a guy comes in with 5,000-6,000 hours single pilot time into the dual environment. Usually they have some issues. They're quite capable. It's not an issue of capability. They're good pilots. Their hands and feet are usually really good. They'll follow the rules, but there's always that little bit of they're so used to being in control of their own aircraft. You see their discomfort in handing that off to somebody else. And the younger guys who come up as co-pilots, they don't seem to have that same issue. And it's always good as an FO if you see something you don't like, you speak up. That's kind of expected. But culturally, that's not always the case, But yeah, it's a difficult environment for sure. And I found for me in my career, every time I made a big step forward, I had to take a few steps back. And you go into a job, you're going to be a first officer. You're just going to be sitting there doing math, maybe. You might not even be flying, and you're going to be a captain of your own aircraft. It's a bit of a blow to the ego, I guess. But some guys do struggle with it for sure. But it depends on the captain, too. I think those old school captains, like my first captain when I got into the two crew, basically it was me to just sit there and shut up. I could put the gear up and down if I was quick enough. I could talk on the radio maybe, unless it was something important to say, and then he would say it. I just sat there and I was loading and unloading the stretcher, and it was quite, I guess, humbling for quite a while. But I think that's kind of been beaten out of the system now. I think most captains are trying to bring, first officers up, but there's definitely some ego issues going on there for sure.
Totally, I can see that. I mean, I would argue that all of us helicopter pilots, and probably just pilots in general, all have a little bit of an ego.
Yeah, for sure.
Some more than others, and I think that's part of just being a pilot. I think there's a layer of that's important. As long as you can rein that ego in, it's an okay thing. From your experience of having, say, a crappy command pilot or an old codger that was like, just sit down and shut up. What do you do now as a guy that's been in this industry for so long? You have so much to give to guys and gals like myself that are younger, that get the opportunity to fly with you as a first officer. How do you kind of nurture those individuals and help them kind of find their feet and guide them through becoming, proficient two-person crew?
Well, you try to include them in everything. Like you might have the whole flight figured out. You might know the weather that you're comfortable with or not comfortable with, but you bring them in and ask their opinion and, generally listen to what they have to say. Same as in the cockpit, they say something. It might be something totally, you're way ahead of it, but you never shut them down. You always listen, and, maybe it is something you haven't thought of. But it's really important to bring them along. And I've seen it myself a few times. Like I know I was on a Puma training course for the L2, and the other guy was fairly experienced, but I had a lot of Puma time. And I was in the sim, and he was getting a little frustrated, and things wouldn't. I would just reach over, and do whatever on the FMS, and I was just kind of overriding. I was getting impatient, and that night after we finished training, he sat me down and said, "Well, I don't think the CRM's going very good. We don't have very good resource management here, and I'm feeling kind of left out." And he was 100% right. I apologized to him. I said, "Yeah, you're right. I need to slow down." And so you got to keep assessing yourself too, and try to bring everybody along. I think the bigger issue in a two crew environment is like I was flying a lot with 400-hour guy, and when you're flying with a 400-hour guy, you're all over it. Like you're on top of everything. But the bad stuff always happened when I was sitting with another experienced captain. I get another guy there with me with as much time as I had, and I would relax, he would relax, and then we made the biggest screw ups that would never happen if you had a pairing that was high time guy and a low time guy because pay more attention. So that's definitely a pitfall you fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. Complacency, especially when you're feeling comfortable. I've always said in the flight training environment, at least, your most dangerous student is your best student, right? The more times that I've been scared as a flight instructor back in the day was with a guy or a gal that I was super confident in their ability. They flew well, they had good airmanship, they rarely made mistakes, and every once in a while, you put your guard down a little bit, and it would bite you, And so I always stayed fairly on guard, and it could be as something as simple as you've been doing autos and they're killing it, it's great, and then you go and enter an auto and they try to roll the throttle on, when they put the collective down, just like the weirdest little strangest things. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's certainly easy to find that complacency, and it's interesting, and I think it's good to hear from you, even as a high time guy, expressing that. I think a lot of our listeners are either just starting their career, they're lower time. I think with anything within helicopters, complacency is a killer. And whether it's a single pilot environment or dual pilot.
I think that nobody's born being able to, place a drill or, bucket on a fire or fly an ILS. Like all that stuff has to be learned. You have to start somewhere. And, you have to kind of be patient and think, where was I when I was at that point, and just try to bring them along, help them along, be supportive. And I find a lot of guys seem to have this attitude of what they do, they're the only guys that can do it. But you got to bring guys up that you weren't born being able to do any of that stuff. So it takes time, and you need to be patient.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard to be patient sometimes. I've always people would ask me like, what is it like to teach someone how to fly? And the way that I would explain it, love my dad. My dad's an amazing man, ran a business his entire life. He's a painting contractor, never did an ounce of advertising. Everything was word of mouth, provided great customer service, and he gave me and my brother and us a great life, But with that, he was very not tech savvy, even to this day. I'm not sure he's ever turned a computer on, and then he gets an iPhone. Why, I don't know. And it's like, I've always said that teaching someone to fly is like trying to teach my dad how to Google something, where it's like, it's so hard to watch him, like, finger tap, where you could just like, give me the phone and let me do it. But if I do that, then he doesn't learn. And it took about a year, but he's finally got the iPhone down. He's a Facebooker, which is pretty funny. Mm-hmm. He makes the he doesn't really quite understand it, but he's getting there. But I've always kind of said like that's what it is to me to like flight instruct, where you want to interject, you want to help that person, and you think that maybe if you interject, that's the best way to help. But sometimes it's just to allow them to make safe mistakes or to be slower with something or whatever it may be.
Well, we had this guy, he was an older fellow, like gazillion hours. He had been everywhere, done everything, probably had 20 years on me. He was an excellent pilot, made good decisions. You have to worry about him, but he couldn't make the captain's upgrade on this job. And the guys just wouldn't upgrade him because he couldn't run the FMS and like the technical stuff. And I thought, we got to get this guy upgraded. Like, he was almost ready to retire, but let's make him a captain before he retires. And I just sat him down and said, you're doing the FMS. Like, that's it. You're doing that. You're going to sit over there. That's all you're going to do. And he took it to heart. And my gosh, he figured it out really quick. And of course, he made the upgrades before he retired to captain. But sometimes you just got to, some people struggle with that stuff for sure.
Has that been, one thing that I've always said is that, I grew up in an era where, I had Game Boy, I had Nintendo 64, I had Microsoft Flight Simulator, I had the internet. I grew up with a lot of technology. So as I've become an aviator into a fairly more advanced cockpit now with glass cockpit and upgraded avionics, was there a transition for you, or have you kind of just has your tech savviness kind of grown with your career as the avionics have gotten better and better? You just kind of just kept on
Went with
top of
it.
it.
Yeah, it was a good transition for me because I went from went to the first IFR aircraft. It was a pretty simple one, the 222, and then I went into a 76 and got the GPSs, and it was just a general, then I went into the 61s. That's old school. You had to hand fly everything. Then we went to the Pumas. Now you got an FMS, and it was funny because the IFR approaches, it just came in with the RNAV GPS approaches. So we had to figure out how to do them with the FMS, and it was like I would sit there and try to figure it out and write a training program for it. So I was always involved with helping guys train for new stuff coming in. So I was quite involved with it. So yeah, I think I've come up with it, so it hasn't really been a big issue. And my first glass cockpit and full glass cockpit was with the 139. But I had little, like we had 76s that had a couple glass instruments, and there was a general transition for sure. Like the 139, when you get into the glass pit cockpit on that thing, it's very, very user friendly. It's very intuitive. It's not a difficult system to learn.
I think that's what I found too. When I was doing my air medical training, some of the guys that were in my training class with me were actually kind of older guys that had been doing other things in the industry, or they were, had been military pilots, and then they did something else for a while, and then they wanted to get back into aviation, and they had such a fear of the upgraded cockpit. Again, the cockpit that I was in and what we were flying at that company was, G500H, with your MFD, PFD. You had your 650 Garmin and a HeliSAS autopilot. So it wasn't even like a crazy, full glass setup, but it was partial. And, I would kind of encourage them like, hey, look, you got to go and just try it, because it seemed like they were so fearful of it that was actually going to be what was the hold them back. And then they start
Yeah,
playing
for
with
sure.
it and they're like, oh my God, this is so intuitive and it's so easy. And it's like, well, of course, they've designed it to be that way. So I think with some of
Yeah.
the guys that are maybe from a different generation, didn't grow up with all this tech world, I think that it's more of a reluctance to use it, opposed to
Oh,
actually it being
definitely,
difficult
definitely.
to use.
Yeah, and when I went on the Pumas, I was working with a lot of VFR guys, and like when I'm doing a ferry flight, I don't even think twice about it. I just go, we'll couple up and relax, right?
Of
And there
course.
was one guy would not couple his aircraft up. He would fly with the force trim off and just hand fly it like an A-star. And when it was my turn to fly, a couple up, he goes, well, let me fly. And I said, well, got the autopilot. And I goes, no, if he's going to use the autopilot, pretend I'm your autopilot, I want to hand fly. So, and he just like hand flew it all the time. And I was trying to, some of the guys are quite good. They wanted to learn how to use it. They wanted to experiment with it and try it out, you know, get comfortable with it. And that's fine. The guy, it's when you're flying it, fly the way you want to fly it. But you definitely saw that some guys were not comfortable. Like we had the 4-axis on the Pumas offshore, and it was all 61 guys. And they all liked the autopilots, but a lot of guys were comfortable with the collective being driven. It added another element, and it was a bit complicated because it was the first generation autopilot. It would over torque. It would, if you didn't manage it properly, you could get yourself into trouble with that autopilot. So a lot of guys just wouldn't use it. They would just use the pitch and roll. That's it. And you can fly it that way. It's fine. But I like to use everything in the aircraft. But if the pilots didn't want to, there was no pressure for them to fly it that way. But I always try to use everything. If the newer generations, like the 139, it's not going to over torque. If it loses an engine, it's going to figure it out. Like it's just so easy nowadays. But some of the older autopilot aircraft, you had to watch yourself.
Yeah, it's incredible. The advancements are just insane. Well, now, I'm actually not really familiar with an FMS, a flight management system, I think is what it's called. For me and to our listeners out there that may not fully grasp what that is, what is your understanding of an FMS, and what is your kind of experience?
Well, like on the 139, for example, the AW139, the FMS system is fully integrated. So It's fully coupled to everything else. You just put in your routing. Let's say you're going from this airport to this airport. It'll ask you your arrival or your departure. You put in your departure. You get to choose which IFR departure, and it'll fly it. It'll do everything. Give you the headings, the altitudes. It'll fly the approaches. It just does. It's all your radios are on it. It takes mostly from GPS signals, but they're also capable of taking like VOR signals and figuring out DMEs. And they're once you start using them, they're pretty good. And the first one I saw was on the Puma with the UNS-1D. It was a little bit more work to figure out, but once you get on it, you don't want to go back. But like the new Garmin's, like say if you put in a Garmin, it'll do almost everything an FS will do. Like they're pretty slick.
Yeah, it's
They're
incredible.
User friendly too.
I always really enjoyed that.
That's basically what an FMS is. The bigger Garmin's are the same thing. It's just not coupled to the system, but I think they can be too nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, you can couple it, and it pretty much can do whatever. And even with my 2-axis autopilot, I could couple it to an RNAV approach if I was, say, like an inadvertent IMC situation, and it would fly the entire approach. I would use, the collective to control my airspeed, essentially once we were on glide path. But I mean, it's a pretty snazzy system. I want to talk about the second half of your career. But first, we're just going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Hillsboro Heli Academy. Embark on your helicopter pilot journey with Hillsboro Heli Academy. Known worldwide, they make it easy to achieve both U.S. and European helicopter licenses. Visit flyhaa.com to schedule your introductory flight and turn your dream into a career.
All right. Thanks to our sponsors for making the Helicopter podcast possible. Special big thanks to Vertical Helicast and Mike Reno over at MHM Publishing. How did you connect with Mike Reno, Darcy?
I think I've met him. He was doing some, he didn't fly with me, but he did a shoot with the operation I was with. They were flying 61s out of Halifax over the Sable Island project. So he went offshore with the guys. I met him there, I think. Then I was writing. I wrote a couple of novels, and I wrote an article for about a ferry trip that I did. And I originally did it for a blog. This guy has a helicopter blog, and it was well received. And I'm not sure if Mike got wind of it or how he heard about it. He asked me if he could, I could rewrite it, kind of take out some of the details that I, maybe were appropriate, and published it for Vertical.
That's super cool. Yeah, I had a chance to read that. What was the blog that you put it on? Was it the Rotor Break?
Helicopters. I have to find it. I have to find it for you, but I can't remember. But I'm not sure the guy's still doing it.
There was a guy that I had early on in the podcast. I think his name was Steven, and he had a helicopter blog called the Rotor Break, and he would have contributors.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, man, I would have to look back. I think it's like within the first 10 episodes that I ever did in the podcast, back in the Stone Ages of when I was fiddling around with this whole concept. He came on. He's great, great guy. I think at that time he was flying 139s offshore, maybe in like Angola. Maybe
he was in Maryland for a while, ran police, and
Oh yeah, Maryland. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I think he's on fires now.
That's cool. Yeah, super cool guy. Small world, right? Everyone knows each other.
Oh,
in the helicopter world.
For sure.
So obviously, we're going to take a big speed forward bullet train through your pasts, because I know that you've done so much in between your air medical that we had kind of talked about to kind of what you're doing now. But you got out of air medical and started flying big, heavy helicopters, doing utility work. Is that a correct statement?
No, the first gig, I was flying 76s. It was Canadian helicopters at the time. They had the ambulance contract in Ontario before Orange took it over. And I got to fly at the time, the offshore out of Halifax was also Canadian helicopters. They also had the international division. This is before they separated and sold it off. It's quite a while ago. But we used to bring captains from the offshore to fill in on the ambulance because we were short-staffed. And I got to fly with some of the senior guys, and the base manager at Halifax, Rob Lagasse, he enjoyed flying with me. He says, how's that fly offshore, 61s, yeah. And the pay was significantly better. I'd never been out to the East Coast, but I said yes. And the wife and I moved out to Halifax, and I started flying 61s out to the Stable Project. That was pretty serious stuff. We didn't really seem to care if it was day or night. The 61, 200 miles offshore in winter and icing conditions, it was interesting work for sure.
Yeah, so you're like flying at night over water, getting like, is that correct?
Yeah, like we were, we were flying at night. It was scary stuff. In the summer, it was no big deal. Like, go IFR, and we come back, and it'd be 108, and you have to hand fly the approach, and we were going so slow on the 61. I think feed mini was like 45 knots or something.
Wow.
And you got 40 knots of winds. You'd be coming like 5 knots down the ILS, and you get to 200 feet, and one guy be looking out. They got a light, and continue, or you just keep going down. It was wild stuff, but in the winter, it was a little more scary. The weather had to be better, of course. But 200 miles offshore, you have what kind of weather. You're constantly, checking the mirrors for icing, watching the temperatures, watching your torques. You never had to do it. We had this procedure. If you started picking up ice, I'd go down close to water. And I remember one of the guys telling me, if the ice gets bad, just bring the NR back. Comb the blades enough so it shed the ice. Stuff like we didn't have to do that, but it was interesting stuff. And then Halifax, the weather could move in pretty quickly, so sometimes you'd come back. It couldn't go IFR if it was winter, so you'd have to kind of run up a valley and crawl through the trees trying to get back to base. And it was stressful. And then we did some utility work. We did some long line shops off the coast of Newfoundland. I lost an engine, almost died up there. I don't know what it was. One of my books actually was kind of scary, but that was 61s.
Tell us that story.
As a fix.
I want to hear that story.
Well, it was that story. We had boats to sling on Rosemore National Park on the west coast of Newfoundland. And it was in the winter, and the guy I was with was like a 20,000-hour 61 guy, and just a really experienced fellow. I was fairly new. I hadn't made captain yet on the 61. We went up to do this long line job. The rail on the side with the sliding door, it's been known to sometimes get some snow and ice built up in there. And that's what we figured out. And we were crawling down the coast, and some ice let loose, and the engine ate it, put the engine out. Weather was really, really bad. They were basically calling walk stop 00 and Seaville Airport. They could run on landing. Down we went because we couldn't get turned around with 40 knots on the keys. It was pretty scary. I actually wrote about it in detail. I have a fictional novel, but I put that in one of the chapters is a fictional thing that one actually happened.
That's really cool. What is your novel? Are your novels?
I wrote two. There's two published anyways. I wrote The Helicopter Pilot. It's about it's not really a comedy, but it's about a pilot at his first tour in East Africa, and he just does not fit in. He doesn't fit the role at all. And, during the course of the novel, he tries to be more adventurous and try to get into the local culture, as the pilots who have been there for a while have. And, of course, things go horribly wrong. I enjoyed that novel. It's a fairly straightforward story. And then I wrote a second one. It's a little more complex. It follows two separate pilots traveling all over all these international contracts. It's basically based loosely on things that have happened, but it's a lot of fiction in it too. They've done both. Cool. They both done quite well.
That's really cool. Where can we find them? Can we get them online?
It's on Amazon. Oh yeah, they're on Amazon. Let's
get we gotta get a camera shot.
Yeah, so there's the Helicopter Pilot.
Awesome.
It's on Amazon, and Cologne Coffee. I based that on I was in Gabon, and there was a engineer walked into the pilot's office there once, and he goes, "It smells like pilots in here." We're like, "What do pilots smell like?" And he said, "Oh, cologne and coffee."
Cologne and coffee. That's so true.
That, so yeah, so
have you?
On that.
What are you a coffee drinker? One thing I've noticed in aviation, because I'll go to someone's house or we'll go somewhere and they'll say, "Oh, sorry, I only have this coffee," and And I'll say, oh, trust me, I've drinking every horrible coffee that you can imagine, being in aviation. Are you a coffee guy?
Oh yeah, yeah. I like my those black rifles,
Oh
man.
yeah, you got your black rifle. Yeah, we were talking about that before the show.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love
yeah. It's dark. I like dark roast.
just drink it black.
Oh yeah.
Yep, see, I'm telling you, it's a helicopter pilot thing. Like I would say that there's a very high percentage of helicopter pilots that drink not so good coffee and they just drink it black, and it's like our human
Yeah.
Jet A. What's the
Yeah,
you
so
know
after the 61, we got Pumas. The reason I originally went out there to Halifax, well, it was a better paying job, but they were supposed to be getting 609s. They were like supposed to be the launch customer of the 609, the tilt rotor. And of course, it never happened. This is like back in, I went to Halifax, okay, in 2001 on the 61. And then they were going to get Pumas, Super Pumas. And they were a long time coming, but we finally got them. They were de-iced, like certified for flight and known icing. 4-axis autopilots, and we got those things, and it just took all the stress, or not all the stress, but a great deal of the stress of flying out of the east coast of Canada. You didn't have to worry about it. We used to launch in full-on blizzards. The machine just didn't care. It could shoot an ILS down to 75 feet, hands off, and you could handle the turbulence much better. It was a nice machine. I really liked the Puma.
Yeah, it's super cool. What I know that the Puma, I think the 225 specifically, had some issues in the past where transmission problem. They figured out that one of the planetary gears was being manufactured by a different manufacturer, and they would actually had like rotor separation, I think, on two separate times. One in Norway or maybe both. And did that ever affect any operations?
One was Norway and one was Korea.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where, but did that ever affect like your operation?
Oh, definitely. Well, not us. I was in East Africa at the time when that happened, and it kind of killed the Pumas for offshore. And at the time, I wasn't nervous flying the thing because, like, they had a gazillion flight hours where the transmission didn't fail. So I wasn't too concerned about it happening to me. I didn't mind flying the aircraft. I liked it. But the 92 was making a big, it was coming out very big. And it's much more comfortable for the passengers. It's like getting on a bus, right? Like it's a very comfortable aircraft. The Puma's a little cramped in the back, especially with the Canadian guys. Like they're big, strong dudes. They got on the wetsuits or the dry suits, sorry, and the seats were very, very cramped. And going sometimes you go out 2 hours and miss and come back and turn around and do it again. So it wasn't the guys didn't really like the Puma that much. The passengers, the pilots liked it, but. Yeah, that just killed it.
Yeah, it wasn't good. It was a dark couple of years for the Puma, and then there's a couple of operators that were willing to continue to use them, and they scooped them up real cheap. I think I heard something like, man, brand new, they were like $23 million or something crazy, and then they had these ones that were being sold by these companies because they no longer want to use them, and they were being sold for like $1 million, and they had like 800 hours on them. Dirt cheap.
Yeah. Oh no, it's happening. That's what I was doing the last 2 years. Was back on Pumas. I flew them for years. The company I was with lost the contract in Halifax and overseas, international, with Pumas first, and then the 139. But when the Pumas died offshore, luckily I was on 139s at the time, so I was just able to keep working. But then a couple of years ago, a buddy of mine was. Buying a couple L2 Pumas that needed to be, they've been sitting in storage for a while. So I think they spent a lot more money bringing them back into service than actually purchasing them, but using them for utility. We had the bubble doors, with the long line window, and we were down in Chile fighting fires with them, doing power line construction jobs up in northern Ontario. You can take 11,000 pounds on the hook with those things, so they're good lifters.
That's incredible. Amazing machines. I've never had the privilege of flying one or even being in one while flying, but incredible. I was at European Rotors recently, and they had one up there, and just like getting into it, it's just like such a giant helicopter. It's such a foreign concept for a little helicopter guy like me. It's like, man, I can't believe this thing flies. It's like it would be bizarre. Is it weird to wrap your head around going from kind of a smaller airframe to flying this almost like Greyhound-sized bus helicopter?
No, it's the same thing. Like I was flying 61s, and then I took an A-star out for a few months. Then I was back on 61s. Then I was back on Pumas and jumping all over. It's just a helicopter. You just give it more time and fly a little slower. You don't flare it quite so low because you know smack the tail. Just flop a helicopter behind you, but it flies the same.
That's so cool. With one of the things that caught me in your bio is I think you said something like 50 countries that you've been
Yeah,
to
yeah.
through aviation. What are some of the highlights of that time of traveling to different countries, and what are some of the cool flying that you did?
Well, I flew for CHC, which was doing a lot of. I was always on the exploration end of things. A lot of guys got into the production bases where, let's say, like Thailand or Malaysia, they had production platforms, and you would go in there and you could spend your whole career there. You could be 20 years flying, around Thailand or around Malaysia or wherever. But I was always on the exploration end of things. So we would go somewhere for a well. We might be 3 months, we might be 9 months, we might be 2 years if there was a couple of wells. But luckily, I got to see a lot of different country. Sometimes the aircraft are ferried to the different jobs. Sometimes they take the blades off and stick them on an Antonov, or maybe put them on a boat, a ship, depending on how quickly they need to get there and the cost involved. But yeah, I got quite lucky. Spent a lot of time in Africa, East Africa, West Africa, Middle East, and South America.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I just went around and counted all the countries. But like a ferry flight, you can just tick off quite a few countries. But
That's
I
true.
spent a great deal of time. Like I was like 4 or 5 years in Tanzania, a couple years in Kenya, a couple years in Vaughan. I spent time in Azerbaijan, see, in Chile quite a bit, Suriname. There's lots of places.
And
But
you've
most of
even
the ferry trips you
yeah, you've even had like some pretty long ferries, Central Africa to Central
oh yeah.
Europe, Canada to Chile. What is that experience
Yeah.
like, and what kind of planning goes into like a super long cross country like that? It's just such a non-helicopter operation.
Well, it's pretty cool. The one going from we went from Gabon, just north of Congo, off the west coast of Africa, to Poland, and with a L2 Puma. And one of the pilots, the guy I flew with, he had done it a couple times, so he knew the route. And it wasn't really complicated. You just head north and keep the ocean on the left, right, and just keep going.
Sure.
You have to plan out all your stops, all the fuel stops have to be you know, you have to feel that there's there. You have to have overflight permits. There's companies that take care of that for you, like all the overflight permits for different countries and landing permits. And hotels, we mostly just did ourselves. Like we just figure out where we're going to stop for the night, figure out the hotel, food. But yeah, there's a lot of planning involved for sure.
Any situations ever? I know that there's some civil unrest in some of the countries that you've been in. Any experiences that were kind of frightening, just based on the climate of that current country's current situation?
We've had a few. We got a buddy and I got taken in Congo, Benin. That was on a ferry trip. That was a stupidity, though. That was we had landed in Cotonou, Benin, and we were at a nice resort on the beach, and the pilot saw a nice bar on the drive in. He said, "Let's take back to that bar." And I was like, "Well, I don't really know my way around here." And, like usually I lay low when I get someplace until I get a feel for it. Slowly expand your comfort level and where you go and what you do. And once you're there for a year, it might it's pretty comfortable. But first night, so I took off my watch and wedding ring, anything I had of money, and we walked into this bar. Of course, we're walking home at 1 in the morning. Yeah, a couple of guys with AK-47s came along. Yeah, that was an interesting night. If I hadn't had a couple of beer in me, I probably would have been more scared. But as far as war zones, well, I've been in a few of those too. That had some issues in Kenya. It was kind of interesting. We were actually working there for a while for an American oil company, and we came in one day, and the police were there to meet us. And that's a bit of a long story, but I got pulled aside and taken to the airport operators with the police and stuff, and we were accused of. It's kind of ridiculous. We get yelled at for maybe we were bringing drugs into the country. Maybe we were bringing in mercenaries to overthrow the government. There was all kinds of stuff being thrown out.
Weird.
And the oil company had sent this local guy to negotiate. I just sitting beside him. I'm getting quite upset. He's just relaxed. He was talking, and it turned out after we kind of got things settled out that it was not the airport manager. It was his assistant. He was on holidays, and the local operator who didn't like us being there had been whispering all this stuff into her ear, and she decided to take action on it. And then when the actual manager returned about 3 weeks later, he called us all aside and was apologizing profusely. Luckily, the Kenya partner had helped out too, but that was kind of scary.
Yeah, it can be really intense. I mean, that's I think there's so much magic to being able to travel around the world and get paid to do it, and to fly helicopters, of course. But you run some risks. I've had friends that flew on the east coast of Africa, and I think they were fairly quarantined just because of where they're operating. They didn't really get to travel much outside of their little compound area.
Well, they were kind of pushing that on us. Like, I remember when I was in East Africa, we were in Mtwara down on the Mozambique border for quite a few years, and we knew everybody in town. Most of the shop owners knew us. We used to walk down the beach, and they sent in some new people. The company got bought by a corporation, and all of a sudden security was through the roof. They wanted us to take different routes to and from the airport, and we had to stay in the compound. And I was pretty upset about it, and I said, I'm not doing that. And they said, well, if you're on the base, you got to do it. So I said, well, I got my own place. So I got my own place in Venom. It was dirt cheap. It was like $200 for 6 months. And I just remember I would ride my bicycle into the hangar and see the guys go by in the SUV with the blackout windows, and I'd wave at them. Yeah, it was, this curious. I found it on the international basis, I'd say half the guys wouldn't do anything. They would just come in and stay either at the hotel, go to work, fly back to the hotel. And that was it. That was they were there to work, and that was it. But I figure you spend half your life on the road. You might as well, I want to hang out with locals, go down to the beach, get to know people, go to, music events and sporting events, and I just dive right in.
Yeah, immerse yourself in the
try
culture.
to learn the local language. Yeah, my Swahili was pretty decent. I learned Turkish when I was in Turkey. I try to always, try to experience the place, right? If you're going to be away from home, you might as well be
a Canadian who's fluent in Swahili. It's not something that you hear all the time.
Well, I'm sure I'd be rusty now. I don't know if I remember that much. It's quite a few years ago, but
that's so
I'm
cool.
Sure I'll come back.
Well, unfortunately, we're kind of tapping against our time here. But before we go, 38 years of helicopter flying experience. How many hours does that equate to? Do you even keep track still?
Actually, not that many. Oh no, I keep track. A lot of countries you have to have everything broken down. I'm about 13,000 hours. So like a lot of the jobs, like for 40 years of flying, it's not that much. But a lot of the jobs, especially some of the SAR stuff that I've done, you're just on standby. I know I was on one job where you're training. I was quite often the manager on the job, or I'd be one of the training pilots, so I wouldn't be on the line that much. So yeah, it was a lot of years where you're barely flying 100 or 200 hours. Just the last year in utility, I was flying again. I was doing like 600 hours, 600 to 700 hours a year flying
That's
utility
awesome.
The last few years. But yeah.
I would say though, they say if you have 10,000 hours of something, you're an expert. So you've crossed into this quote unquote area of being an expert. I certainly think you probably are. You've been flying for so long. What is like some, the Darcy Hoover tips of being a safe helicopter pilot?
Just don't get knocked off with something. Just say no. Like the safest place is to be on the ground, right? Not to flying, but you gotta get some work done. You gotta get out there. But the rules and regulations are there. Like in Canada, you can fly in a half-mile viz at reduced speed, but do you want to go crawl, 80, 90 miles through mountains, power lines at a half-mile viz? Like you have to be able to set yourself some comfort level, and that comes with experience too. What you're comfortable with and what you aren't, and if you're not happy, just turn back or land or do whatever you have to do.
Yeah, what's the old saying? Wish you were flying, and be on the ground, opposed to being flying. Wish you were on the ground. It's
Yeah, for sure.
it's pretty. It's funny. It's fairly intuitive, right? But still, there's so many pilots that unfortunately have a lapse in a decision, and it leads to a negative outcome. 13,000 hours of flying time. It's incredible. You've obviously done something, and you continue to do something that's right, or else you wouldn't be here, right?
Well, I've always had my own. Like I worked for a lot of good companies. I worked for a couple that maybe they're a little shady, but I was always just confident in what I didn't like. I remember being on a bush job up in northern Canada back when I started out. Everybody had a lot of time, and the weather was crap. There was a lot of pilots on this job, and there was one young guy who didn't want to fly. He didn't like the weather, and the other guys were like, "Well, screw him. We're going flying." And I said, "That's not cool, guys. Let's support this kid. He's actually speaking up. Like maybe you can do it. Maybe you can get away with it. You got a lot of experience. You know how to handle it, but." He doesn't. And let's back him up and just not push him into something where he's gonna, kill himself.
Well, and just because you can do something doesn't mean that someone else has that same comfort and skill. And I've always encouraged people when they get into an operation. You could be put into an operation where you're flying with guys and gals that have thousands and thousands of hours of doing that operation. They're familiar with that weather, that climate, that area, whatever it may be. Those people are going to fly in different situations than you would. It doesn't make them superior pilots. It just makes them more experienced within that mission. I think what actually makes a good pilot is recognizing that and saying, hey, look, I want to get the job done. I'm a commercial pilot. I want to fly within reason. But I also have to know where my personal limit is, and I think a lot of people sometimes feel that pressure of like having to match. I couldn't go into your operation today and match what you're doing. It wouldn't make sense for me. It wouldn't be safe, So, I think that's probably something that we should, continue to think about. But Darcy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think we're going to have you on again. You've been flying for so long, and I'm sure you have so much to share with our audience. So I think it's super cool, and I just appreciate being able to share this conversation with you and with our audience. Again, thank you to Vertical Helicast and all of our sponsors that make the show possible. To our listeners, please continue to like, subscribe. We have new episodes every Tuesday, all year, no breaks. I haven't taken a break in over a year, and it's because I love doing it and I love the feedback that I get. So continue to like. Please follow us on Instagram as well, Facebook, whatever it is. We love to see that and grow this. Darcy, thank you again for coming on the show, and I look forward to being able to hopefully meet you in person someday and also continue the conversation. Hey, podcast listeners. My name is Halsey Schider, and I'm the principal broker and owner of Helicopter. Helicopter is a new age, data-driven, helicopter-specific sales brokerage, bringing helicopter listings to new heights. At Helicopter, we utilize digital positioning, paid advertising, and our large network of industry professionals to move your helicopter quickly and efficiently. Unsure the value of your helicopter? Lucky for you, Helicopter offers a complimentary market evaluation. All you have to do is contact the team today. Are you ready to take your helicopter listing from Mayday to payday? Easy. Fill out the contact information below, and a Helicopter pilot agent will reach out shortly. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.